This presentation introduces the Week 3 assignment, in which you'll demonstrate an understanding of the elements of exposure and begin to practice combining technical aspects of photography with what you've learned about composition and design thus far in class. The assignment gives you practice working with shutter speed, aperture, and ISO to explore depth of field and controlled motion. You'll view examples and review the technical requirements for each of the 4 categories for this week's assignment. Shutter speed is recorded in seconds and fractions thereof, and is the amount of time that light can reach the sensor. The shutter speed on this photo was 1/1004th of a second. With smartphone cameras, you can get a fast shutter speed when there's lots of sunlight and action. Explore changing your vantage point, exploring getting low to the ground, for example. This example shows a shutter speed of 1/2500th of a second and effectively stops the motion of water droplets. With enough available light, you can get fast shutter speeds to capture motion, such as moving objects, people, or animals. If you're not achieving a fast exposure, increase your ISO up to 1600. Blurred motion is best captured with a shutter speed of 1/15th and lower. Long shutter speeds include those shown on screen. The background objects should not be blurred, just the object or person, such as the dancers running in this photograph, while the others stay still. For the blurred photograph, you want to achieve a controlled blur of a moving object. Blurred motion photographs require a tripod or some sort of camera stabilization. Camera stabilization helps avoid camera movement, which is not a controlled blur. In this photograph, which is taken at 1/40th of a second, the hair on the bass player is slightly blurred. Panning motion photographs move with the action. This is using blurred motion to isolate the subject. If you feel comfortable, pan your camera along in time with the moving object or subject and end up getting a relatively sharp subject but a blurred background. This gives the photograph a feeling of movement and speed. It does require a slow shutter speed of 1/30th and slower. For an effective pan, try to get as close to the action as you can. Depth of field is the range of sharpness in an image from foreground to background. If an image has a shallow depth of field, it will have a blurred background or foreground, depending on the aperture or f-stop used. Focal length makes a difference. Notice how on both the wide angle and telephoto examples, the aperture f-stops are actually the same, but the change of depth of field is distinct. Be sure to use telephoto or portrait mode on an iPhone, which is 75mm for portrait, for your 2 depth of field photographs. A wide open aperture, such as f2.8, allows you to have a narrow depth of field. On a smartphone, you can control the focal point and then lock the focus by pressing and holding on the screen. On a smartphone, you can access your camera settings and select the widest aperture. If you're using an iPhone, you can do this in portrait mode. On Android phones, you go into Pro mode. DSLRs have many different kinds of autofocus features, but manual focus for close-up or macro photography with a shallow depth of field is often ideal. The foreground or background can fall off or be out of focus with shallow depth of field while focusing on a single area. Bokeh is not the blur of shallow depth of field. Rather, bokeh is the quality or feeling of the background or foreground blur when there are many points of reflected light. A bokeh can be achieved using a smartphone or a DSLR. Quality of the lens makes a huge difference. Bokeh can be achieved from using digital imaging apps, but achieving it with the lens of a DSLR or smartphone camera helps set images apart from others. Tips to capture bokeh with a camera include using backlighting, multiple sources of light, such as string lights, reflected light on water, and using close-up or macro focus. For maximum depth of field, set your f-stop to f22, or whichever aperture is smallest. On a smartphone, you can access your camera settings and select the widest aperture your exposure will allow for, in this case f11. Scenes that have patterns make great subjects for exploring depth of field. Wide-angle lenses achieve a greater range of focus than telephoto. A greater area of sharpness can be achieved at f8 with a wide-angle lens as compared to a telephoto or zoom lens. Continue to build on the skills you learn each week to combine design with the technical aspects of the camera.